So panel number 2 is TradFi meets tokenization, the new backbone of capital markets. Our moderator for this panel is Samantha Yap from Yap Global. And we have on the panel Philipp Bohrn from Bitpanda, Luhana from Galaxy, and Angus from Stargate. So I'll hand over now to Samantha.
Great. Good. Hello, is it working? Great. All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all here. Welcome to those who have traveled from other parts of the world and Europe, and then also for those who just came from London. And I hear that Angus just came 15 minutes away down the road. So good to have you here. I'm Samantha. I'm the founder of Yap Global. We're a PR agency that specializes in helping crypto and digital asset companies tell their stories and shape their narratives. And the tokenization of real-world assets has been a topic that has been around for actually many years. Remember security token offerings back in the day, and it's like slowly evolved. But now it's grown up, the industry's grown up, and we're literally seeing, you know, I just came from Singapore. I've seen banks issuing bonds on chain. They're actually integrating with public blockchains. So the industry's come a long way. And so we have my fellow experts and panelists here that we're going to hear from. So I just want to open with, let's just take a step back and assess the state of the tokenization industry. It'd be good to hear from each of you what assets you're seeing in your worlds and your businesses that are getting tokenized today and actually getting implemented. So perhaps we can start with Ved from Galaxy.
Yeah, so hey everyone, I'm Ved, I'm from Galaxy. I'm the product lead for staking, but also DeFi and tokenization, really. Yeah, I think we actually, maybe some of you do know or don't know, but Galaxy actually was the first one to issue Class A stock on the Solana blockchain, I think about a month ago with Superstate. But I think the real use cases that we're seeing mostly across our counterparties in general across the market is a lot of debt, a lot of credit. We've been seeing a few CLO projects come out across the US, but also across Europe because things are a little bit easier to do here in a way. But I think going forward, it's going to be issuing a lot more directly on chain. I think one thing that we're seeing in particular with like what we've done is, because we've issued Class A stock directly on blockchain, we've actually been able to give people the voting rights and the dividend rights, which you usually can't do with tokenized shares or stocks because it's one-to-one representation. So yeah, I think that's kind of the broad spectrum of what we've seen. Great.
Philipp from Bitpanda, what are you guys doing?
I think when I go back to a little bit more generalistic level, then I would say we are young adults right now. We know a little bit what we can do, and we have seen with different projects, as just told, and others have. I mean, we ourselves have had tokenized steel and others there. What are the possibilities? But we are not yet fully there as an industry to kind of kick it off. And thinking about the possibilities of being able to tokenize literally everything, every stock. And I think what we are still not there yet is having to convince at the end of the day the more traditional sector that this could cut their costs extremely, that this would be able to change the way how they're going to do business. And we see more and more of the larger industry. We're working like with SocGen on stablecoin, but also on other projects. And we see some of them interest in there. And I really feel like it's coming up to this hockey stick where then suddenly everything needs to be there because consumers will sooner realize it's more cost efficient, it's fully transferable, it's there 24/7, you can fractionalize it in any way possible. So all the things that make crypto also quite great could make all the assets great. So absolutely a beginning phase where I believe we're in a good way.
Yeah, and just to expand on that, I think the first asset that we've seen a lot of success with tokenization is stablecoins, right? Like the tokenized dollar, the tokenization of the cash in your pocket. And it's become so clear, exactly to your point, Philipp, that it is so much more efficient to use stablecoins for anything, really, for payments, for cross-border settlements, for remittances. And it really is in that hockey stick moment. And we spend a lot of time working with different stablecoin issuers, Tether and Athena, and some of the PayPal, PYUSD, working with them to help them move their assets across these different ecosystems. but I really think like stablecoins are the clear product market fit, and now everything else is coming.
Yeah, and Angus, thanks for raising about stablecoins because yeah, you know, through my previous conversations and also this year, you know, we call the summer stablecoin summer, and it's really picked up this year. You're seeing the adoption from it. But Philipp, you raised a good point about how like there still needs to be this education and encouragement to traditional financial institutions to start seeing the benefits of tokenization and how it could actually improve efficiency and cut costs. What motivations are you seeing from your conversations with traditional institutions to explore tokenization? Because there are, I mean, banks are exploring it. They're just maybe doing it slowly. But yeah, it'd be good to hear from you what you've heard. What's their motivation now behind it?
I think the biggest motivation, to be honest, is fear in the moment, and that's not wrong. Looking at a world where 20 years ago, if you wanted to transmit a value to one place or another, you needed literally probably 3, 4, 5 banks when you take everybody in the middle, when you go from, let's say, UK to Brazil. And every one of them is going to make money and all their systems are relevant. And suddenly we live in a world where you don't need any one of them. And that was really a game changer. And we see some of them now realizing, okay, this can sweep away our industry. And when you look at what crypto adoption does in usability and who is really adapting it, the young people, then we really see that this is basically something that moves in there. But it's not only fear. A lot of them also understand, and I think a lot of individuals, not the institution as a whole yet, but the individuals understand that this is the opportunity for them to grow market. And whoever is going to be the first to do it right is good. And last but not least, there's a lot of them go in the stablecoin thing. Stablecoins might be the fuel for the whole digitalization. If we now digitalize, let's say, an infrastructure building or something like that, we still need something to be able to swap around with that, and then suddenly the stable coins are not only used to transfer money and especially exchanges with crypto, but with other real-world assets. So a lot of these discussions are really around how to build something in the future, and that's gonna be relevant in the future, even though we are not quite aware now, and the others gonna saying, okay, if we lose out on that, we might lose out on the future.
I think one thing to add on that as well, that I've noticed when we've spoken to banks or generally done anything bank focused is like, as any business has, they've invested, 2 to 3 decades in like their e-trading, all of their platforms, and basically most of their tech spend is built on systems that are non-blockchain. So if you go to a bank and look at their tech spend, it's huge. And you're basically saying to them, actually, you just spent, like 2 decades building one of the best e-trading platforms across the world, and actually now there's a platform shift that you have to adjust to, and then redo the whole thing, and then become an expert in something else. And I think when I've spoken to a lot of banks, a lot of them are like, oh, but we've just spent like 5 years investing in this thing. Why do we have to now change it to being on blockchains? And I'm like, well, you either do it or you get left behind, really. So yeah.
I mean, let's move on to the technology and infrastructure, because like you said, so like Ved, you were saying that banks have maybe invested in processes and systems that they think have been beneficial, and then this new technology emerges, and there's public blockchains, and when you want to tokenize something, it's quite scary actually to issue something on a public Ethereum blockchain as opposed to creating your chain. So then there's this also. You're seeing banks experiment with their own chains, but then that comes with it, like there's positives, but there's also downsides of it not being truly transparent and decentralized. Actually, I would like to hear from you, Angus, because you work more on the infrastructure side of things. What are you seeing in terms of traditional financial institutions and their implementation of some of this tokenization of assets?
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting, I think nobody in this room would argue that potentially blockchains are a much better ledger system. But actually, if you look at them in isolation, blockchains are still isolated execution environments. And so they still you still need some sort of infrastructure to move between the different ecosystems. And I think there's also no dispute that a lot of asset issuers or people generally working in crypto want to access the users that are in the different markets on the different blockchains. And so obviously with Layer 0, what we've built is that interoperability between these different ecosystems without the middleman. Built an actual censorship-resistant, immutable infrastructure to power those rails. And every single one of the tokenization platforms or stablecoin issuers is looking at different execution environments. You want to access the users on Solana, but you also want the security of Ethereum. You also want the cheapness of the L2s. And so with Layer 0, we spend a lot of time working with these asset issuers to make sure that even from day one, they have access to those different markets, those different users, those different platforms. And so you've seen it with Tether's recent expansion via USDT 0 across different ecosystems. You see it with, again, Athena or PYUSD. But even the Wyoming State stablecoin Frontier FRNT was also issued on 7 blockchains from day one. And so I think what is most interesting about crypto is its distribution and kind of access to the global markets, and using something like the Layer 0 to be able to access those and kind of powering that infrastructure is something that obviously we interface with a lot.
If I may add to that, so as we are providing a PTS solution where we work with a lot of banks internally and kind of creating an infrastructure with them, be it Société Générale, be it LBBW, be it Raiffeisen, and larger names in Europe. The one thing I found quite curious is that we have in this bank so many different layers of understanding what's going on. So we have usually a couple of geeks who I kind of understand now what's in there. And what we come in there usually is help them to kind of transfer their knowledge to the rest of the company, especially to decision makers, where then go in where they come up with, oh, isn't that all scam or isn't that all AML protective? And then we come in and say, oh, there are processes for that. We can help you build it in a way that makes it work. We can create that on the chain, that even though it's on a chain, it's not totally out of your hands. So there are a lot of ways to educate them, and that's where I feel like we often come in with the PTS product to really come help them to build the infrastructure.
I hope this isn't a hot take, given what Angus said, but I think more and more as I'm seeing kind of like the stablecoin narrative shift, I think we have to be a little bit realistic and understand that I don't think everything's going to be on permissionless blockchains, at least in my opinion. I think things like Tempo, which is Stripe's basically layer 1 that they're building right now, is going to be permissioned. It's basically, I mean, they haven't said it, but I think it's pretty clear that it's going to be a number of validators who are going to run that infrastructure, and it won't be just like all of us can run a node or a validator, because they need to make sure that that money supply and that basically attestation can be controlled to a degree. It can't be just like anyone's being like, oh yeah, I'm doing this, but you're doing that, so no. It has to be permission, because, and I think something like Tempo or a layer 1 blockchain that's built by a payment processor will be the thing that actually onboards, like you were saying, a lot of people to have stablecoins in their pockets, as opposed to us thinking, which is nice for us to think about it and be positive because we've been doing it for a while, but to think that we may be able to do everything on a permissionless public blockchain like Sol or ETH or whatever.
Definitely not a hot take. I agree with that. But even more so, you need the infrastructure to be able to interact between both of those. And if there is a permissioned execution environment, they want to make sure that anything they may still want to interact with Ethereum, but only certain addresses or only certain assets. And being able to again build the infrastructure that allows for that is increasingly important. And I think the more that we see things build out. Last week on Layer 0, we had our largest ever transaction of $800 million moved from Ethereum over to Plasma, or the other way, for $1.50. And I think institutions being able to see that you can move $800 million in 3 minutes for $1 is just going to make them realize that actually the infrastructure has come a long way. I think to your point, there's a lot of people who probably think that there's a lot of scammy things going on and infrastructure that isn't built in a robust way, but I think we've come a long way as an industry, and I think the more kind of stories we have like that and use cases and case studies of more sophisticated financial instruments coming online, but also more institutions kind of working on some of these proof of concepts, the more we're going to see as well.
I mean, so Angus, do you think that current blockchain networks, and whether they be layer 2s or layer 1s, can handle the volume and the speed of global capital markets? Like if all the institutional money flowed in today, do you think they can handle that?
I hope nobody from Solana is in the room, but no, probably not. I think I think there is a lot of block space available. There's a lot of L2s that are out there that probably could do with some more transactions within their block space. But I think if we were going to move the entire financial system online, I think we need a pretty strong level up in what's available.
So what needs to happen? Does it like more do you think more scalability, innovation on that area needs to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. More scalability, more innovation, just greater commoditization of block space. I think there is, again, even though Ethereum and all of its L2s have done a great job in scaling Ethereum and general crypto, I still think there's a lot of work to be done. Again, if we're talking about bringing the entire financial ecosystem on chain, there's still some ways to go.
I mean, I can just echo that.
Yeah,
but
fair.
I would like to kind of also say that we shouldn't forget that this is not going to happen overnight.
Exactly.
And this is kind of the scaling is happening as things are, and as more and more kind of institutions are working in the backbone and having more and more people kind of working on blockchain products, we also get a new know-how. Because the one thing we shouldn't forget is we need this bridge know-how between the blockchain enthusiastic who kind of only thinks kind of permissionless is the only way to go, and those kind of institutions who understand bridging the gap to say what kind of minimum level of control the institutions need to have the trust in that, because at the end of the day we are thinking about outsourcing a lot of what they do into that environment.
And Philipp, you raised a good point earlier, like it still also takes a lot of time to educate people within the organizations to just make sense that there's something real happening here and it's legitimate, yeah.
Especially as a lot of that, and that's I think where a little bit of fear comes in, a lot of that is not driven by consumer need in the moment. So the consumer doesn't need a better infrastructure, but what I do see is when I look at the large crypto brokers in the world, and we are surely part of that, we onboard so many customers for the investment needs, and not only in the crypto world, but also in the investment world. So what happens, more and more users are accustomed to the kind of service we will provide, but then the classic banks find out they can't provide that service to that price because their infrastructure is too expensive, too heavy, too burdensome. And that's where I think the reality will kick in, that they are not going to be competitive with these global and European firms like us in the level of competing with clients.
And I know this panel is about TradFi and tokenization, but this is still only TradFi. This is only financial instruments. Like there's the whole world out there that could be coming on chain in future, but we're a long ways away from that, I think, today.
Well, I mean, Ved, you raised like Tempo as an example, and talking about the bridge, you know, earlier this year you had Robinhood, another fintech listed company as well, creating their own chain. So are we going to see a trend of now fintechs? You know, we're here in the UK, and one of the proudest companies that FCA are proud of is Revolut. And so are we seeing more going to see more fintechs bridging to crypto, and then more banks then flow in? Like what trends are you kind of seeing?
Yeah, I mean, so it's actually funny. So I used to work at Bitpanda before I worked at Galaxy.
Oh, really?
So it's quite funny in that sense. But yeah, so I mean, I think for sure we're going to see more fintechs come online. I think as we've seen over the last decade with fintechs, there is a lot of proliferation that happens. So like, I'm assuming if anyone in the audience is US based, you probably have a Robinhood account and you probably use it pretty actively, or at least my friends and peers who are in the US use it pretty religiously. I think we'll see the way that they have done previously, that the fintechs will bind together. So maybe Stripe will say, hey, we'll own the stablecoin issuance, and then Robinhood will say, okay, we'll own the stock part, and they will, you know, work together, I think, rather than spin up their own blockchains or do interoperability protocols. At least that's my take. I don't think that it will be a case that they will work against each other or try and like get their own segment. They will work with each other. But I don't think that it will be in a very permissionless way, like doing an interoperability thing. But again, that's just what I've noticed from fintechs and how they built their businesses over the last decade, and probably how they'll continue. But
yeah, I mean, you raised a good point. The permission blockchains is still, trust is something that people need to earn and build up, that trust and credibility for this new way of doing things. So moving on to talking about trust, compliance, regulation, how are you guys looking at that in your respective organizations? Because yeah, I think there needs to be some creativity and the time. It will also take time to kind of convince regulators that what this is the best way forward for financial.
Yeah, I guess I can start with like the US lens. Obviously, like the SEC is very clear that if it's a tokenized equity, it's still an equity. They don't treat it any different, and I don't think that will change at any point in any time, which I think is actually the correct treatment. Obviously, everyone has different opinions, but I think at the end of the day, if it's an equity that is issued on-chain, off-chain, it is still an equity. So I think the thing that we are seeing, or that I think a lot of people will find and face an issue in, is actually the key unlock, at least that I see in tokenized equities, is basically DeFi and basically being able to take that and use it as collateral across the ecosystem. And I think that's when things will start to get hairy, and we're not sure either, right? It's going to be interesting to see if you go to any governmental agency and say, hey, we want to do something on Morpho using the collateral of our stock, or hey, we want to go use this as an RWA collateral. I think Aave's done really well in their Horizon product for RWAs. I think that's been really, really helpful and useful because they're such a leader in the lending space. But I think it's interesting as well because we also, with our tokenized equities for Galaxy stock, we also partner with Superstate, and they went live last week with their partnership with Backpack. So on day one, you would be able to trade that equity, which I think getting it into DeFi and making sure it's across the ecosystem as wide as possible is going to be the hardest point of legislation or regulation over the next 12 to 18 months.
I just want to come back just a moment to the topic of trust again, because first of all, it combines very much with it, but I don't think trust is the only factor. I think there's one factor even more relevant. It's going to be global pressure. At the end of the day, if I have a usability all around the world that is kind of be used and therefore being cheap and easy, then this is going to create so much global pressures that single markets, even like the EU or Britain, are not going to be able to help that, because then they're going to see they're left out. And that's, at the end of the day, that happened with the payment sector, with now a couple of schemes really being the most relevant. And coming to compliance, we in Bitpanda, we have the most MiCA licenses in Europe. We have our registrations, literally 2 registrations in UK and in other countries. So we always worked into that. I mean, our founders for 7.5 years ago, when they hired me, basically said, you need to bridge the gap for us, because I come from the TradFi world, and they say, you need to kind of get us all this license. You need to kind of create that for the professionalization. So I do think that we need to follow a certain way, but the first thing is to have the innovation right, do it correctly, and do it in a governance fine way where you think about doing it the right way. But I wouldn't consider saying we need to kind of make everything to work for everybody. Let's one example. You can't do a real stablecoin in the EU. And the reason is because the European Union decided they don't want to do that. I find it funny when you speak with commissioners in the EU and they're saying, why don't we have project? The reason why we don't have project is because they didn't want that, because they created rules on there. But that shouldn't discourage us to do this kind of projects, because at the end of the day, it's a global pressure, it's a global idea that we bring up there, and to innovate further and then make it fit as far as possible to market.
Philipp, do you see a regulation as an enabler or more of an obstacle then?
It depends absolutely on the regulation. So when you look at how the US created Genius, they were thinking about how can I make that work for everybody and make it global. When I look at MiCA and the same for a stablecoin, that was about fear and not wanting it. And then the result is that, and I'm kind of very curious being in the UK today, how this is going to be shaping out. Is the fear going to be the one, or the innovation driver in there to say, yes, we need a framework to go against market abuse? Honestly, I mean, the industry will need better guidelines to handle that internationally, because that's going to deteriorate our trust long term. But we need some governance rules and define how the firms should generally work. But what we don't need is kind of rules on how we need to innovate, how the product's going to look like. Because honestly, who of us can really tell how in 5 years this digitalization is going to work? So whatever kind of rules we come in there are going to be really kind of be a barrier, because then suddenly we have a new way, and then we say, can we make it fit to this regulation? If you start thinking that way, you're the second. You need to say, what makes sense? What's the infrastructure in a government way where I feel like the result should be something that works for everybody, but not go to one solution.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. Just when we were first building Layer 0, kind of from first principles, that was exactly the mindset of whatever we need to use today is not what we're going to need to use in 3, 5, 10 years, both from a technical perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. Like something that we think about a lot with Layer 0 is kind of verification between these different ecosystems. And from a technical side, there's been a lot of innovation in ZK, and we need to make sure that we can add in these ZK verification mechanisms, but also from the regulatory perspective, we need, if you're moving a $1 NFT between different ecosystems, or you're moving $100 million, it's very different from what you, the verification mechanisms you use are very different from what you'll need if you're interacting with a permissioned ecosystem, for example. And so building the infrastructure in the right way such that it is modular enough that you can kind of have all of those levels and all of your application builders and institutions can achieve kind of the level of compliance that they need to, I think is incredibly important. We have a lot of meme coins, for example, that are built on Layer 0, and they use kind of one verification method. It's very cheap. Their users are happy. But we also, as I said, we work with PayPal, who are, and their PYUSD issued by Paxos, regulated by the NYDFS. And we need to make sure that when they are moving this token between different ecosystems, that the verification methods that are used are kind of looked at by the NYDFS, kind of given the green light to continue working with that. And so, for example, with PYUSD, they run their own DVN, decentralized verifier network, to make sure that every single message between two blockchains is verified by their infrastructure, which has been approved by their necessary regulatory bodies. So building the infrastructure in a way that can actually scale into the future, and you don't have to keep rebuilding and making it fit, to Philipp's point, is incredibly important.
So we want policymakers and regulators to think more about the innovation and not be so limited by the rules and not do it out of fear. I think that's a good message. Something that we hope to see here in the UK as well. Let's just then look a year from now, and then 5 years from now. Stablecoin adoption has really hit its groove this year with stablecoin summer. You're seeing a lot of like PayYUSD, a lot of fintechs also creating their own stable coins. Where do you guys see the tokenization of assets and the bridge between a TradFi and the digital asset world going in the next year? What's your outlook?
Yeah, I think in the next year we'll obviously see a big acceleration of usage of stablecoins. I think a great project is Plasma, as Angus mentioned earlier. Like, the team's based out of London. I think they're doing really great work, and they generally are going to do, I think, really cool things coming down the pipeline. So I think we'll see a lot more stablecoin adoption in the next at least 12 months. I think if we look a little bit further than that, we should, in theory, but let's see most, if not all, financial equities come on chain in a form. Now, there's obviously two flavors of that can be very different. There's either on-chain issuance directly, or there is the one-to-one, mirroring of the actual equity or thing that you're talking about. So I think it's really actually going to depend mainly on how the financial institutions that are already in there, the TradFi teams, see this as out of fear or innovation. I think that's going to be the real big unlock. I think they've now been forced into a position with regulation that it kind of has to be done. And so, I think in the next 12 months, hopefully all of us will be able to use our stable coins in Gales and Tesco's and wherever you shop. And then in the next few years, you should be able to sell your US equities on the weekend. But let's see.
I absolutely agree. So in the next 12 months, looking at the stablecoin heightened adoptions, absolutely. But I also think, and that's going to be working a little bit in parallel, we see more and more real life assets probably starting somewhere in the digital stocks and the stocks area to kind of be on chain, just as a universal kind of trying this out. And in 5 years, I think there is going to be just that's the standard on how to connect that, because then we have all the things in place. We have a way of paying on them with on-chain, with stable coins. We have the connectability, we have the right amount of banks and non-banks being able to provide that kind of services to clients. So we really have this kind of move into that direction.
Yeah, I think in the same way that stablecoins, as you say, have kind of had stablecoin summer, I think liquidity begets liquidity. And so as some of these tokenization platforms begin to gain some adoption, it will just continue to snowball and get bigger. And we've seen a few on the global markets have released some tokenized stocks, Kraken released some, Robinhood have started and will probably continue. And I think the more that come online, the more they will snowball and grow larger. And it's funny, Vlad Tenev, the founder or CEO of Robinhood, was asked this question on stage in Singapore, and he just said tokenization will eat the entire financial system. And so I think we hopefully all feel the same way in this room, but I do think, yeah, it'll just continue to accelerate and snowball.
Yeah, great, that's exciting. And just to wrap up with final thoughts on this panel, yeah, it'd be good to hear what each of you are individually focused on in the next year, because there's still a lot of work that needs to happen. And Philipp, you said it's not going to happen overnight. So, I mean, sounds like it's exciting. The prospects of the growth of this industry is coming, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So what are each of you going to be individually focused on in your respective areas and organizations?
Yeah, so I think for Galaxy, we've got a really great partner in Superstate that we work with really, really closely, that we've tokenized and been able to issue like our Class A stock on chain for both our DAT, which is called Forward Industries, and also our actual equity. I think for the next 12 months, it'll be basically just ramping that up and ensuring that anything that we do, we can do direct on-chain issuance. And then I think a big thing for me, at least, being like a very crypto native person, it's making sure that we do have that liquidity unlock. So making sure that we can embed some of these equities that we are tokenizing to be, you know, on an RV market or within any sort of DeFi protocol that you want to have. Because at least for me, I'm a really big believer that you should be able to have that unlock if we've been able to tokenize it in the first place. So yeah, I think it's tokenizing more and more of our stock and our DAT, and then also making sure it's fully accessible and liquidity management can be as perfect as possible.
So I think the one thing we a couple of things. The first one, on a global level, we want to continue providing like the largest amount of assets on our services. Right now it's more than 600 crypto assets, thousands of other assets. We're going to work on going more and more in that. And we do that in two ways. First of all, working with different partners, with different projects to kind of give them the reach they need. So they have the infrastructure, we have the reach with the client space to kind of get their projects moving. That's kind of the one major thing. The second major thing we are going to continue forward is working with the TradFi sector, be it, and other projects also, but with them to be able to provide services to their clients, to educate them, to understand them that all of this can be done in a regulated and legal way. And last but not least, then working on more and more localization when all the regulations coming in, like in UK, to have this then fit for that, a global offering that's the largest that there is, and then localized to the different countries, but always with innovation and the largest choice of consumers in our mindset.
Yeah, we'll continue working with everyone who wants to build across different ecosystems, and a lot of the partners that I've named today, Ondo and PayPal, etc. And but I spent the last couple of years as the foundation lead for Stargate. We were recently acquired into Layer 0 2 months ago, and so on the Layer 0 side, working very much to continue proliferating those rails and providing the infrastructure, and then on the Stargate side, I mean, it's no secret that the crypto UX is still a little bit challenging sometimes, and so we're working very hard to make a product that just abstracts a lot of that away and kind of unifies it into a single interface.
Great. Thank you guys for your insights. Can everyone just please give my fellow panelists a round of applause? Great conversation. Thank you very much.